Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Speaker Stories. We're here today with Mark Millard. Mark is a geoscience manager at Rockies Resources LLC. He has over 15 years of experience in nearly every basin in the Rockies and Texas. Mark is also our August 22nd Luncheon speaker. So again, coming up soon at the Wynkoop Brewery, we have a luncheon series from 11:30 to 1. Mark's going to be taking us through well log normalization, and specifically the title of his talk is Back to the Future of Well log normalization using a geologic trend-based approach. Mark, thanks so much for being here. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Great. Yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time today and talking with us. But let's just get into it. So first, tell us where you're from.
Yeah, that's a pretty broad question. I currently reside in Denver, Colorado, but I'm kind of from all over. Before I turned 20, I'd lived in 3 different countries in North and South America,
Oh, wow.
Canada, US, and Chile. So, but most recently, Colorado is my home. It's got the
Okay.
best skiing.
So moving around. So tell us, can you tell us what parts of South, you said Chile and where else in South America?
So in South America, it was only Chile. I was there for 1999 to 2001. Also lived in Canada at one point. And then in the US, I've been everywhere from Montana to Texas and Idaho, everything in between.
Wow.
It's
Great.
fun.
Yeah, that's super fun. How did you get into geology?
I wish I had one of those stories where I would dig up fossils when I was a kid. Most of my adventures were in the cities, and so I didn't have much exposure to rocks. And serendipity happened. I was a freshman in college, and I was a psychology major, and the class I wanted to get into was full. So I saw this geology class. That must be that's what Indiana Jones does. Who knows? So I signed up for it, and it was amazing. It was cool. It was a very applied science, which is fun. I assumed I would be working as a park ranger in Yellowstone.
Right.
Took a slightly different route, but it's worked out very well. And in fact, ironically, I met my wife in the geology lab.
Oh, okay.
PA at the time, and she was taking the course, and so I got up in the front, started telling some geology jokes, and the rest is history.
That's great. That's a great story. So, I think the more I talk to folks in these kind of interview series, I think it's pretty common to not really have the geology path in mind and just kind of fall into it. I think that's pretty cool. When you were in college, you got into geology, and then that was at BYU, Idaho. Is that
Yes.
correct? And so what kind of things did you work on there? What kind of projects?
Yeah. So at BYU Idaho, it's a smaller school, and at the time, we only had maybe a dozen kids in the program. But what is great about it is if you've ever been to Southeast Idaho, kind of close to Driggs and Jackson, Wyoming, it is in Rexburg, Idaho, which is the center of the geologic universe. You've got the Snake River Plain, you've got the Tetons, you've got mountains on all sides. And so we did a lot of field trips. My senior thesis was focused on the interaction of Yellowstone volcanics with man-made structures. Specifically, I was looking at the failure of the Teton Dam.
Okay.
And how that was related to the tectonics of the area. But yeah, being in Idaho, we had every type of outcrop you could look for, modern and ancient outcrops. In addition to that, as an undergrad, I was very fortunate to take part in a research project up in southern Maine, where we essentially lived on kayaks for the summer. We'd kayak out to different islands, stay there, map the geology, kayak to the next one. And so it was a very different experience in Southeast Idaho, but all of my undergrad studies were very field focused, which is fun while your legs are still working well and your knees are functioning as you would hope. So
yeah, and if that's not a good advertisement for getting into geology, doing research in in Idaho and also on kayaks in southern
Oh,
Maine.
yeah.
That sounds amazing.
A
So
lot of fun.
that's super cool. And then, so did you plan on going to grad school, or was that something that kind of you fell into your lap as well? Or
Yeah, as I mentioned in my intro course, I decided I'd probably end up being a park ranger. My professors, they introduced me to the different opportunities, environmental, oil and gas, and things like that. And oil and gas instantly jumped out at me, just because it's basically a treasure hunt. It's a lot of fun, and so to do that, you have to have a graduate degree. And and there were a few professors at the university that really influenced me: Rob Clayton, Bill Little, and Mark Lovell. But it was also, I attended the AAPG Rocky Mountain Rendezvous. This was in 2004, 2005.
okay.
And I met Rondie Martinson. And she instantly took me under her wing at the conference, introduced me to every company company representative that she knew. And she really had a big impact in me, not only deciding to go to grad school, but also to try and pursue something in the industry that I'm currently in.
Oh, that's super cool. Yeah, that was a really fun event. I've been to a few of those, and yeah, it's cool because it just the Rocky Mountain Rendezvous always seemed to kind of capture like the excitement of the students and industry kind of merging in that as well, and yeah, it's really cool.
And I think it allowed us that aren't in Texas, the oil center of the universe. It allowed us to have an opportunity to gain exposure to that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And so, what did you do for your dissertation or your thesis project at Baylor?
Yeah. So I was working with Dr. Vince Cronin, and at the time, while I knew I wanted to get into oil and gas, the thesis is grad schools that still gives you an opportunity to maybe pursue your other interests while going towards oil and gas. And so I had a thesis focused on it was a mix of GIS and active tectonics and some geophysics. And essentially, we were in Malibu, California, mapping potentially seismogenic faults. What we did is we collected a database of earthquake focal mechanisms, the old beach ball diagrams, and we projected those to the surface of a digital elevation model. And then we went out in the field and looked for evidence of fault rupture or things like that, to tie these earthquake events to things that we see on the surface. And we did this onshore. And so in my field area, I had Malibu Beach. I had Cher had a home there. Britney Spears had a home within my field area. But then we also did it offshore using some sub-bottom acoustic surveys to tie it to different gas seeps and things like that.
Did you have good confidence in the surface in tying surface features to the earthquakes at depth? How did it?
Yeah. So we just to protect ourselves legally, we never called these active faults. Last thing you want is Britney coming after you with a lawsuit. So, but we would present all the evidence. So not only would we project it to the surface, and we would have kind of an error swap within there, based on the focal mechanism solution. It'll tell you if it's strike slip or a normal fault or whatever. We would then look for those same types of movement features on the outcrops. So we'd tie the rake and everything to what we're seeing in the subsurface. And you can never say it's 100% related, but we were able to map out a couple areas where you see a number of they're usually typically smaller seismic events over a series of years that all tend to link up airily on the map. And then we'll tie that with different lineaments that we're able to pick out from some different GIS techniques and remote sensing techniques.
Oh, cool.
So
yeah, that sounds like an awesome project. I realized that I didn't really kind of get into how you picked Baylor, but that's a pretty good segue. So was it part of the project that drove you to Baylor? What led you to Baylor?
Yeah, Baylor's in Waco, which is the heart of Texas, but it's hot summers, not a lot of mountains around. But for me, really, when I looked at all the different universities, it was 100% the project, and the instructor. Obviously I wanted to get into oil and gas, and so being in Texas helps. But for me, it came down to what project really entices me. And I had a few different that I was looking at. But this one particularly jumped out at me because it was, at the time, I was very into GIS and remote sensing and also structural geology. So it kind of aligned those two there.
Okay, cool. Very cool. Then you want to just tell us a little bit about your career path after grad school? How'd you get in?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, Ronnie Martinson she was a lifesaver for me. She took me under her wings, even though I wasn't her student, but we stayed in contact. And she actually connected me with a few different geologists at a few different companies. And they became kind of my mentors as I went through this. And I actually got my first position through not the Rocky Mountain Rendezvous, but the one that they have in Houston, the big APG event they have down there. I started working out at Pioneer Natural Resources, and this was in 2007. So it was right when we were in the transition from conventional plays to unconventional plays. Barnett was just taking off. And so I started with them. And so a few of us that are from that kind of 2004 to 2007 time period, I think we kind of saw the best of both worlds, because we saw all of the techniques and applications of conventional plays, but then we were also on the forefront of unconventional plays. So yes, we can go geosteer well, we can, do a big geochemical survey, but we can also build our own petrophysical models and things like that. So that, it's all about timing in the oil industry with prospects or anything. But in this case, as far as my career progression, I feel like that was the optimal time to be able to get the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
And so I was at Pioneer for a few years, and I was actually, one of the funnest projects I worked on was when we got into Eagle Ford in 2007, 2008. We were one of the first companies to drill a horizontal well in the Eagle Ford. And I was young at the time, so I was still absorbing a lot, but I was able to be a part of that initial team that got Pioneer into the Eagle Ford. It's not often when you can look at these big plays and look at one of the first 10 wells drilled and it has your name on the mud log.
Yeah, that sounds both exciting and maybe a little bit nerve-wracking too.
Well, and I didn't realize the implications at the time. We're testing this Eagle Ford. We'll see what happens with it. And now
Let's go.
Yeah, it's a household name at this point.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So after Pioneer, how have you navigated your career since? What's been helping?
Yeah. So, they always say that networking is important. And I mean, it is really the number one thing. I mean, that's how there are a lot of jobs listed online, but there are so many more jobs that are never listed online, that are only given through networking. And I mean, it makes sense. You want to hire people that you know or trust, or that are referred from people you know or trust. For me, I was working at Pioneer in 2008, 2009, I think it's 2011. And this is in Dallas. And I saw an opportunity for a job in Billings, Montana with SM Energy. And at first I came home and I joked with my wife about moving to Montana. And I joked with a coworker, and I was like, yeah, Montana. And he said, no, Montana is awesome. And so that's when it became a real thought. Hey, maybe I will move to Montana. So I was up in Montana with SM Energy from 2011 to 2016, and they moved us down here. And then our vice president and a few of the other managers left SM Energy and started Rockies Resources, where I am now. And so, I'm now with a much smaller company, but it's with people that I've been working with for the 10 years before that. And so they always talk about, not burning bridges and keeping your network strong, but that really is true. I mean, that's how it happens is through connections you've made in the past.
Definitely. Yeah, it's we work in a small world. It's important to not burn those bridges and nurture your network. Yeah, that's
exactly.
You've already mentioned Rondi as a potential mentor. What do you think makes a good mentor now that we're kind of, we're getting to be the senior folk in the industry? Like, how do we we become good mentors for those that are trying to get into the industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there are a few things. First, before you even consider mentoring anyone officially or unofficially, I think that you need to understand that there's not one, the career path is not one size fits all. And part of that is because there are just so many different options for opportunities for geologists. The other part is that all of us are different. One person might be very technically savvy, but they struggle with sharing their message. Other people might be really good at sharing their message, but they tend to miss small details. And so I think as a mentor, you need to step back when you're working with someone. You need to look at what that person's skills and their weaknesses are and try and adapt your mentoring towards what you think they need best. I could tell a person to just go to every luncheon they can and meet every person they can, but that might not work for them. Their personality might not be for that. So I think we need to tailor our mentoring to the person that we're mentoring. I think along with that too, another important thing is a big part of mentoring isn't really sharing my knowledge. It's really just listening and kind of being that support system for the person as they go through it. We've learned, I'm sure you're the same way. We've learned a lot of things from people over the years, but a lot of the moves that we've made have been from ourselves. And so, you could give me mentorship all day long, but the only way, sometimes it helps, but a lot of the time, the way I'm going to progress is by me making the decisions, me coming up with crazy ideas, failing, succeeding, etc. And as a mentor, a big part of what you do is listen and give me affirmation with what I'm doing.
Yeah, and then I've found that like sometimes in the toughest moments or the hardest decisions, like a good mentor, just kind of giving that perspective that maybe you're not thinking about. That's really important. But I like what you said about kind of tailoring it to the person. But yeah, you're right. We have to the person has to make those decisions on their own. So that's important to support that.
And I get one final thing in mentoring, I think, is as a mentor, we need to be willing to stretch our neck out to help someone, throw someone a bone. This goes back to Ronnie Martinson at that fateful Rocky Mountain Rendezvous. I was a junior in college. I didn't even know how petroleum is formed or anything like that. But she took me at this conference and literally took me from booth to booth in Canada, Hess, you name it, and introduced me to all the different people there. And so she, not even knowing me that well, was willing to go and put her name out there and say, hey, talk to this guy. And people like you and me, as you mentioned, we've kind of been around for a while, so we know a lot of people. And I think we as mentors should be willing to help other people make connections.
Yeah.
Share our network with others.
100%. Yeah, and especially when when there's so few jobs in the oil and gas industry for geoscientists these days, like it all depends on somebody putting in a good word. And so yeah, just
exactly
trying to help people where we can. So advice. Cool. That's great. Thanks. So tell me about your favorite mineral, outcrop, or fossil, or
well, all of the minerals that I used to love, I forgot the name of those about a year after grad school.
Yeah, I won't ask you the chemical formulas then.
Exactly. I don't have Ron Parker here next to me helping me out. But for me, I'm gonna broaden that a little bit. And instead of describing my favorite outcrop, I'm gonna describe my favorite state, geologic state. And that is, well, actually half of the state is Utah. Southern Utah has the best outcrops of anywhere in the world. You got Goblin Valley, you've got Little Rattlesnake Canyon, you got the Arches. It just goes on and on. And so I could try to focus on a specific outcrop or area, but it's really just Southern Utah. Yeah. It's the best place on earth. So
amazing and unique place.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great answer. I love it. And then outside of geology or Southern Utah, what do you do for fun?
So I'm on a, that's a good question. For me, I think I think that should be a question that is asked in every single interview, because as you know, this is can be a very stressful job.
Yeah.
And then also I'm a parent too, so that just adds to the complexity of things. But I think that every single person needs outside hobbies. They need something that when they're walking to lunch at work or when they're driving home, they need to think of something other than just work. And for me, it's music. I play a lot of music. I play bluegrass music, and then I also build musical instruments. So that's what really brings me joy. And I can show you a couple if you want. I happen to have 5 or 6 of them sitting around me.
Let's see it.
Surprisingly. So a lot of what I do geologically, working at a small company, you often don't have the same resources you would at a super major. And so you have to develop your own work methodologies, your own workflows, things like that. And so you're often just taking things from all over to try and build this. And so I first started building instruments made out of a lot of upcycled materials. Like let me see if I can turn off my
blur.
Yeah, let me see if I can make this work here. I'm showing my lack of technical prowess here. Give me 2 seconds. All right, so I started making instruments out of here's one out of a tin can that I found in my wife's backyard. This is a tenor guitar.
Nice.
And this allowed me to kind of figure out what does or doesn't work without spending a lot of time or a lot of money. And then I've since kind of upgraded into higher end instruments. Here's a mandolin that I built.
Oh wow, it's beautiful.
Scratch here, and then also I got a violin here. So I build a lot of musical instruments.
Yeah.
And what's fun is to obviously follow. With instrument building, you have to follow a lot of specific measurements. You have to get everything just right, but it also allows a lot of creativity. And so I like to kind of push those creative boundaries on the side as I'm building these instruments.
Oh, that's super cool. So how did you get into that? Did you just start kind of following YouTube videos or kits, or did you just kind of start doing it? Have you been a woodworker? Or?
Yeah, it's just like how I happened into a geology class because the other one I wanted was full. I was on a lunch break one day up in Billings, and often at lunch you'll go walk around downtown and there's a library. So I went in the library and I found a book on instrument building, and I was like, I could try this out. And so it was a random book, and 10 years later, I've got a basement full of instruments. It's kind of a mess at this point, but it's fun.
Yeah. And you mentioned you're a dad. Do your kids play?
Yeah. So my wife and I, actually, we will go out and play at breweries and stuff like that as a little duo. And then my son, he's a high schooler. He plays guitar, and then my youngest son plays violin. So they don't play with us. That's always been my dream, to have a family band, but I've got to play. That's close.
They don't play with you. They just don't want to.
They don't by choice. I don't know. It's been we give them some room. Actually, ironically, my son, he played guitar, he played violin and orchestra for years, and it never really connected with him. And then last summer I got him playing guitar. And just last week he played at a jam with me. So at a bluegrass jam here in town. So I think you got to find which instrument speaks to each child.
Yeah, definitely. Very cool. All right. So can you give us a shameless promotion for your August 22nd talk? Who should attend and what can we expect?
Yeah. So obviously everybody should attend, every single person. So this is actually, I've given a couple different variations of this talk in the past, one that was focused more on workflows and one that was focused more on case studies. And this will actually combine the two. For me, everything I do geologically is very petrophysically driven. Again, that comes back to kind of being right at the transition of conventional and unconventional plays. And so petrophysics is a huge thing for me. But one thing that is often missed is normalizing and cleaning up your logs. And a lot of people do normalize, but they just use the standard workflows that, just do a field average, boom, and you're done. But what I'm presenting is a way to do the most geologically honest normalization possible, taking in regional mapping to account for regional variations that would affect your well logs. And so while log normalization may not be the most entertaining sounding topic in the world, it is super important. And if you still don't find it important, I'm going to have an instrument. We're going to have a little sing along at the end. So,
Okay. And should we expect all kinds of logs being for this workflow? Gamma, density? What is it? Mainly gamma focused, or?
I mean, it can.
You don't have to spoil it, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is, obviously when you're dealing with logs, you have to do environmental corrections, you have wellbore issues, things like that. But what we're looking at is it can be with gamma, or, density is going to be affected by, let's say you're looking at shales and you bury a shale from 7,000 feet to 14,000 feet, even though it's just a boring gray shale, that baseline porosity value is going to change. Mm-hmm. And so whenever you're looking at any of these logs, the idea is that we're allowing for regional changes in the geology. And that's what we're trying to accommodate here. A normal log normalization, like we've been doing for the last 40 years, makes sense when you look at conventional plays where you're only dealing with 1 or 2 townships of data max. Nowadays, we deal with entire basins. And if you use just a normal standard normalization and you're looking at the entire Powder River Basin, you're going to normalize out variances that you see on either end of the basin. So that's what this takes into account. And it can work with all logs. And as a little teaser to go along with that, the methodology I'm showing is applied to log normalization, but you can really use regional trend maps for your petrophysics in general. A lot of those petrophysical variables that go into a Simondou or even a simple Archie equation, they can be mapped regionally because you do see regional changes, and those can be applied to your mapping too.
Excellent. Great. Well, we really look forward to it. And again, Mark's talk is August 22nd. That's a Tuesday. That's not next week Tuesday, but the week after. We'll be going from 11:30 to 1 at the Wynkoop Brewing Company downtown. You can register and join us in person, or if you're remote, you can join via Zoom. We do have a hybrid option, so be there. Mark, thanks so much for talking with me today, and thanks for being a speaker for RMS SCPM, and we really look forward to it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Hope to see everybody there.
All of the Rockies.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Mark. Have a great day.
All right. See ya.